All right. Good afternoon, everyone. We'll go ahead and get started. My name is Kelsey Erickson-Stroifert. I think I probably know everyone on, but just in case, I'm the Chief Public Affairs Officer for the Texas Restaurant Association. Happy 2 days after the election. We've all made it. We're here. So if nothing else, we can celebrate that. But we are excited to kind of go through today's presentation. This is our Capital Insiders exclusive, so it's really meant for our donors who are giving at the $1,000 or more level every year. Thank you so much. Your support is really why and how we are able to do the things that we do when it comes to advocacy at our state capital and with our federal partners at national. So thank you. And with that, we will dive right into some housekeeping items. First, this really is a confidential discussion for you as our donors and our members. So please don't share these slides beyond, leadership in your office. It's really meant to be a confidential conversation. Closed to media, off the record, shouldn't be any media folks on, but we always like to add that disclaimer. Not legal advice, of course, and then we will make the recording available to our TRA Capital Insiders. So if you need it, just let Erica know. Erica's running tech in the background, by the way. Thank you, Erica. And then lastly, engage with us. If you've got questions, just drop a line in the chat. Erica and I will be watching that as we go. So with that, let's dive in. So first, the election was only a couple days ago, but there's already a lot that we know in terms of the outcome. So you probably know by now, former President Trump has won his election with at least 295 electoral college votes. He only needed 270, and he probably will get even more than that 295 number. Some of those states are still counting ballots. A couple other sort of noteworthy things about the presidential election. He is currently on track to sweep all 7 swing states, which is pretty remarkable. I don't think a lot of folks would have bet that that would have been the outcome. But it just shows that he really did overperform a lot of the expectations. He's also currently winning the popular vote by 50.9% to 47.6%. So we'll get into some of these trends a little bit more, but clearly an indication of, like I said, a stronger than expected performance. We also know that Republicans have regained the majority in the U.S. Senate. Now, this was something that was pretty expected amongst folks who follow the campaigns closely. The West Virginia senator retired. He was a Democrat, and so most folks expected that seat to flip, which it did. In addition, Republicans flipped seats in Ohio and Montana. So we know at this point, even as states are still counting ballots, we know that they're at least going to retake the majority with 52 Republicans. What we don't quite know yet is the U.S. House. But looking at the numbers, and we'll get into this a little bit more in a minute, it's likely at this point that Republicans are going to have a trifecta and have control of the U.S. House as well. A couple other just kind of noteworthy items. In the U.S. Senate, there were some thoughts that Democrats would challenge in a few Republican seats, including right here in Texas. But those seats really all stayed red. So that would be Cruz in Texas, Rick Scott in Florida, and Deb Fischer in Nebraska. They all won pretty handedly. And then we also know that Democrats actually won at least 3 competitive U.S. Senate seats. That would be Maryland, Michigan, and Wisconsin. So a few other things that we know already as of today. And this is really a little bit more drilled down into Texas. So all of the Texas elections are decided at this point. We're pretty quick at counting ballots here in Texas. None of our federal seats flipped. So as I mentioned before, Senator Cruz won his reelection, again, pretty solidly. And our partisan divide in the U.S. House remains unchanged. We'll have 25 Republicans and 13 Democrats. So no real surprises there. We also know that Trump actually improved on his margin in Texas. So he defeated Vice President Harris 56 to 42 back in 2020 when he was last on the ballot. he defeated Biden 52 to 46.5. So about a 4-point increase in Texas compared to his last presidential election. And then turnout. There's going to be a lot of discussions about turnout in the next few weeks. Texas's turnout was 11.3 million. That was up slightly from our last presidential campaign, but we are seeing that turnout was less enthusiastic in many of the major urban areas, which probably contributes to that margin improving for Trump, as I mentioned. This map you're probably seeing a lot. In terms of kind of overall themes from this election, I think it's pretty fair to say that we had a red wave. All of these arrows show changes from 2020 to 2024. You can see there are a lot of red arrows on the screen and not very many blue arrows. Other themes that we saw, Trump made gains on his 2020 performance, not only in red states, but also in blue states. I think the big interesting kind of trend and standout is the Hispanic vote. So Hispanic men across the US went from being plus 23 for Biden in 2020 to in this election, they went plus 10 for Trump. So that's a 33-point swing in just 4 years, which is pretty extraordinary. It also explains how Trump made significant gains in South Texas. You can see a lot of those red arrows down in South Texas. And he was able to win counties like Miami-Dade and Florida, which had not gone blue or had not gone red for very many years. Also interesting, more than half of Texas Latinos supported Trump. So again, that's just a demographic that we kind of need to keep our eye on because it's changing in unexpected ways, frankly. There were also widening gaps in terms of how people voted based on their education levels. So college educated folks are increasingly blue and non-college educated folks are increasingly red, and that gap is widening. And then when I look at all the data and think about, how this happened and how we got here, I think about James Carville saying it's the economy, stupid. I think that's really what voters told us in this election, is that they are worried and they do not feel secure when it comes to their current economic status. And at the end of the day, they trusted Trump with the economy more than they trusted VP Harris. That, I think, is really why we're seeing the results we saw. The one sort of caution I'll point in all of this, you'll hear a lot of people say, this is unprecedented. This is the beginning of a new era. Some of that may be true, but it's also very consistent with what we're seeing in many other countries around the world. This is a change election. People are very upset about the economy, and so they are voting the incumbents, whoever he or she may be, out of office. And I think that's really what we saw here today, or this week. There were also a lot of interesting ballot initiatives on states' ballots across the country. Massachusetts voters rejected a phase out of the tip credit by a pretty significant margin. This is really exciting for us because it means restaurants had a perfect record of defeating tip credit elimination across the US this year. Huge accomplishment and something that I think we all should be really proud of. On the other hand, Arizona voters rejected an attempt to put the state's tip credit in their constitution. And that was kind of a proactive attack to save the tip credit. And it actually did work in a lot of ways because One Fair Wage and others were trying to get rid of the tip credit. And so the restaurants there essentially moved forward trying to put it in the Constitution as a way to deflect from the effort to get rid of it completely. So the good news is tip credit still exists in Arizona. Lots of minimum wage issues on the ballot as well. So Missouri adopted a minimum wage increase. Alaska did as well. Plus, their ballot initiative also had a mandatory sick leave that passed as part of that. And similarly, Nebraska adopted a mandatory sick leave. So really in every state where we had either an increase to the minimum wage or some kind of increased worker protection, those passed pretty overwhelmingly. So definitely something for us as an industry to be aware of. Not a great day for the legalized marijuana movement. You can see 3 states rejected efforts to legalize marijuana in those states. And then this one's a real surprise, frankly, to a lot of folks. It's still too early to call, but in California, there was a ballot initiative to increase their minimum wage. And at least as of now, that is losing. So if that proposition went down, that would be a very, frankly, dramatic sign that voters in California are starting to really feel the pinch of all of the wage increases and regulations that they put into place there. And again, pop any questions you have in the chat as we go. I know I'm going through a lot of information really quickly, so don't hesitate to kind of slow me down. So what's next? As I mentioned, there's still ballots being counted in lots of states across the US, especially in California and out west. So we don't know the answer to everything quite yet. The big thing that we don't know is which party is going to control the US House. Again, we think it's going to be the Republicans based on the numbers you can see on that screen, but we don't know for sure yet. The US Senate, we know Republicans are going to be the majority, but how big is their cushion going to be? So right now there's 3 outstanding races in the US Senate. The Democrats are up in 2, Arizona and Nevada. And actually right before this presentation, the decision desk called the race for the Democrat in Nevada. So quite possibly that will move from an outstanding to a, concluded race. And then Republicans are up in one of those races in Pennsylvania. So if those numbers hold, we'll have 53 Republicans and 47 Democrats in the US Senate. Why does that matter? Well, for a few reasons. One, obviously, all of our judges and Trump's cabinet appointees have to be confirmed by the US Senate. And so the more of a cushion he has on those numbers, the more likely he is to get those appointments confirmed. It also really impacts sort of the negotiating of major bills in Congress. So if the numbers had been closer, say 51-49, then moderate Republicans like Susan Collins, Murkowski out of Alaska, right? Those moderate Republicans would have a lot of power to sort of buck their party or require their party to come to the middle. But if we're seeing a margin that's more like 53-47, then Republicans have more ability to move their agenda forward and frankly don't have to compromise as much. So that's something to watch. Again, still watching a lot of the US House races, but the fact that they're leading in 18 additional seats, that would get them far over that magic 218 number. And so that's why you're seeing most folks are coming to the conclusion that Republicans will ultimately gain control over the US House. And again, if that happens, that means they have the trifecta. They have the White House, the Senate, and the House. We also are going to be looking at leadership races very soon. So both chambers are going to host their elections on November 13th. The US House, it's pretty much a predetermined outcome. No one thinks that there's going to be serious challengers to existing leadership. So that would mean we keep Speaker Johnson, Scalise, Emmer, and Stefanik round out his team. But the US Senate is a big question mark. Our own John Cornyn from Texas is very much in the running to replace Majority Leader McConnell. John Thune is the other sort of favorite, and then Rick Scott is seen as kind of the third most likely candidate. This will be interesting because it is truly a secret ballot election. So you will see folks say that, Trump's influence might come into play here, but there's really no accountability in terms of who votes for whom. And so it might be more of an independent vote than you would otherwise see. So now the real question, how does all of this impact restaurants, which is really what we care about here, right? So first of all, Republicans are already signaling that they're going to use a process called budget reconciliation in the first 100 days. Why does that matter? Budget reconciliation is the one process where the filibuster does not come into play. So, earlier we talked about the margins in the Senate might be 53-47. that's plenty of Republicans to get something done through budget reconciliation. Democrats can't use a filibuster to stop them. We fully expect taxes to really be the first major legislative priority that they attack, which is good and bad for us. It's good because we knew this fight was coming. There are a lot of tax credits that are expiring in 2025. And there are a lot of tax priorities that we want to see enacted as part of this bill. You can kind of see a whole list here: small business pass through, bonus depreciation, deductibility under EBITDA. I can't ever say that. But also things like the work opportunity tax credits and what is the corporate tax rate going to be. So in 2017, Trump's tax package lowered the corporate tax rate from 35% to 21%. So that's where we are currently. Part of his campaign promises was to further lower that rate to 15%. We're already hearing people say that's probably too low. That would probably really hurt our federal deficit. But Trump is one who usually sticks to his campaign promises in a lot of ways. So I would certainly see an effort to lower that tax rate further, even if they can't quite get to 15%. The other thing that's going to be very much in the mix in all of this is the no tax on tips proposal. We know that Trump and Harris both put forward a proposal on that, but we always felt like if President Trump won re-election, that he would really try to make that a priority in this tax package. Y'all know that that is something that we as the association have supported because ultimately it benefits our workforce. At the same time, you look at this long list of tax priorities, we have to be really clear and really direct in the fact that we cannot let no taxes on tips become our singular focus, because there's a lot at stake when it comes to taxes. And we have to make sure that restaurants are strong and able to succeed so that our workforce can also succeed. Emily, perfect timing. I can take a break and a sip of water because I've been running through these very quickly. Anything to add on tax policy, which we know is going to come fast and furious with this new White House administration?
Yeah, I mean, I think, hello, everyone, and I apologize. I'm at another event and I've actually spent my morning talking about tax policy, which is why I'm a little bit myself. I think two things. One, and Kelsey and I went back and forth on this earlier. I think that there is a conversation around no taxes on tips, and I think there's a very broad tax conversation. And what I encourage people here this morning is that we don't want to lose one for the other, right? The cost and implementation of taxes on tips is significant. And I think what I'm most excited about is if there is this very aggressive, broad approach to tax policy, that is going to be a game changer for you all. A, preserving, but B, even adding on to what you benefit from today. So you can be assured that I was asked today by a large restaurant owner, like, is the National Association working on this? And you better bet they are. They're very engaged in this. They know exactly what we need. And then we'll reach out to you all if needed to double down on your local elected officials to make sure that we get this done. But I think this can be an early win for you. And what I mean by early is summer, Kelsey, is what I'm imagining. But I think this is significant. And so we just, again, do not want to get bogged down in an implementation conversation around no taxes on tips and let this drag out by any means, or take the focus also off of what you see on the screen, which is the most value to you.
Absolutely. Yeah, it is going to be fast and furious. I fully expect the first 100 days we will see various versions and negotiations, and it's going to be exciting in a lot of ways and a real opportunity to really strengthen our industry. So that's some good news.
Yes.
Other restaurant priorities that we are watching now that we know who's going to be in the White House. Trump's tariff plans is something that we need to all be watching really closely. This would impact everything from produce from Mexico to equipment coming out of China to olive oil coming out of Europe and beer and wine. And not to mention just the economy at large, right? His plan really is to put tariffs on pretty much every imported good. So not only does that impact our cost structure, but the costs that our consumers are bearing as well. We get asked a lot on both of these topics, tariff and immigration enforcement. Is Trump really going to do what he says he's going to do, right? Is he really going to go that far? Are people going to rein him in? And what I would say to that is we can't assume he's not going to do what he promised, right? He was very clear all during the campaign about what his objectives were. He won with a surprising high vote count. So he sees that as a mandate and a big endorsement on many of his policies. So we cannot take for granted that he is going to be moderated on these issues by other people, is sort of how I would explain it, and why it's so important that we're at the table to really explain how these things would impact our industry and what alternatives exist to meet his objectives without hurting our industry, right? I think that's really the key.
Mhm.
So in terms of an immigration enforcement, not to scare people, but Trump has promised mass deportations on day one, right? So I just think we need to be very clear about what he has said, and make sure that we are prepared to engage in those conversations. A lot of this he can do via executive order. He doesn't necessarily need Congress. That said, we know there will be legal challenges to some of these executive orders, et cetera. So all that to say, there's going to be a lot of noise, a lot of news, a lot of things coming out on this topic. You're probably going to get a lot of questions from employees and others. This is where just please stay in contact with us. Please read the newsletter consistently, because we are going to help you ferret out what's the truth, what's not, what can we do, how do we stay prepared, what are the legal resources. So just lean on us for those updates. Anything to add there, Emily?
Yeah, I would just say I think it's critically important you stay really close to your employees, because I think the three pieces that we would be concerned about, right, is agriculture, supply chain, and our own workers. And we know in Texas that's significant. And so for us, I think I would just encourage all of you to kind of take those soft skills that makes you restaurant owners and leaders and make sure that you're communicating to your team members, because if they're afraid, they're likely not coming to work. If they're unsure, they're not going to come to work. And so I think that just creating an environment where they can feel safe with you, regardless of whether their status is or isn't, I just think that's some really good advice that we all need to take to heart, is the empathy of the noise in this. I think being with about 30 restaurant leaders today, I think they believe that the bark is worse than the bite, but I'm with Kelsey. I'd rather manage to, being really clear about starting the conversations now about these individuals, but all we can go on is what has been told to us. And so, as Kelsey said, there's going to be so much noise in the system. Please just rely on us to tell you fact from fiction. I cannot say that enough.
Agreed. And then the other piece of this, of course, is there's an ongoing lawsuit over the DACA program. So we continue to follow that very closely as well. And I do expect we'll get some kind of ruling out of the Fifth Circuit, within this year. So just keep
Yep.
an eye out for that as well. Okay, so a few other restaurant priorities that we know will be coming up to the top. The DOL overtime rule. Already received a question. Do we expect a Trump White House to change the trajectory of this DOL overtime rule that we've been fighting? The answer is probably, but let's remember he's not sworn in until January 20th. So the new thresholds are set to kick in January 1. We have our ongoing lawsuit with the National Restaurant Association. We actually have a hearing on that lawsuit tomorrow. So that remains our sort of immediate path to relief on this issue. And then I also think we will work with the Trump administration to repeal parts of that rule. So it's a both strategy, not an either or. OSHA had proposed a new heat hazard rule that would have impacted our industry and just about any other. Wouldn't be surprised if a Trump administration takes another look at that. We already won the dual jobs 80/20/30 lawsuit. Wouldn't be surprised if the Trump administration essentially recognizes or codifies that court ruling, which would be great for us in terms of just taking that
And
issue
great
off
for
the
other
table.
states. Yeah, and
Yes,
other states are trying to figure out in their own circuits, should they put the money and cost and time into doing it themselves, and that would be a huge win because it would be just null and void, period.
exactly. Yeah, it would
Mhm.
just clarify things across the board, which is always
Mhm.
helpful. I think we'll see some changes in environmental and energy regulations. Again, I think there's a lot he can do in terms of executive order. And that might be good for our Texas economy. We obviously have to wait and see what the specifics are, but certainly something for us to keep an eye on, especially in Texas. Hopefully, you've seen in our newsletters, we've been telling you about BOI reporting, beneficial ownership information. This is a requirement that's set to go into effect by January 1, 2025. Now that we know Trump is going to be in office, we are going to ask for a 1-year delay, but that's not guaranteed. So for now, that reporting requirement is going to kick into effect. We have great resources from our partner at Cerboni to help make sure you are in compliance with that. But that's something we're watching. And then also we will see new leadership at agencies like the NLRB and the EEOC, but their members are still likely to be in the minority. So it's kind of an interesting swap there, but it might help us see more reasonable regulations coming out of those agencies.
And Kelsey, one of the things that was discussed this morning with one of the policy advisors here is that on the NLRB, that the first replacement isn't due for 2 years. And the president has authority on day one to eliminate all of them and put his own board in place.
Okay.
And there's
That's a
some
new angle.
thought through inside source, let's call it that there's discussion about that right now, that he may just
Okay.
do that. I have no comment on that, but I didn't realize that was a possibility. And it sounds like it is, and that he may go that route.
Interesting. Well, I think that's a great example of, Trump's power over sort of agency officials has a lot of power to actually impact the regulations that come out in the end. One thing I've heard is that heading into this inauguration, he is much more prepared to
Yes.
sort of hire folks day one, for lack of a better word.
Yep.
So I think he will move much more quickly on setting up his team. Again, especially since the Senate is going to be pretty tilted in his favor. So
Right.
confirmations and that sort of thing should be quicker. So something to watch for sure. Swipe fee politics are going to get even more interesting, believe it or not. So you may recall that our incoming vice president was one of the co-authors of our swipe fee bill, JD Vance. So that is exciting. On the other hand, Chair Durbin, who's a Democrat, is going to lose his leadership seat since the Democrats lost the Senate, and he was a big champion. We also think Tim Scott is likely to become the chair of the banking committee, and he is not exactly an ally on this issue. So some wins, some losses. We kind of have a shuffled deck on the issue of swipe fees, but it's certainly something that we're going to continue to pursue very strongly. And then ERTC refunds. We know those have finally started to trickle out again. We are going to continue to press the IRS, especially given this change in administration, to get those checks out the door and finally wrap up this program.
Mm-hmm.
All right, we are about to switch over to state elections. So I'll put out a call again. If anyone has any questions, if there's anything we didn't cover on the federal side, drop us a line in the chat. We want to make sure that we are answering your questions. And with that, I'll keep plugging away here. All right, so a lot of focus on the federal landscape, but of course we had some really big state elections happen this week as well. And we actually had some changes and some unexpected results. So in the Texas legislature, Republicans picked up 1 Texas Senate seat and 2 Texas House seats. Senator LaMantia in South Texas lost her race. And then there were 2 open House seats that used to be held by Democrats that are now going to be held by Republicans. Republicans also defended against some challengers in several races that were supposed to be close and really ended up being not all that close. So Representative Meyer, Chin Button, Lujan, they'll all be back next session. Several of them we work with very closely, so we're excited to work with them again. And then kind of the interesting little snippet about the Texas elections as Republicans made major gains in our Texas Courts of Appeals races. These are races that sometimes are a little bit under the radar, but they can have a major impact on the policy direction of the state. So pretty amazingly, Republicans won 25 of 26 of those contested races. It's somewhat of a flip from 2018 when Democrats swept a lot of these appellate court seats.
Kelsey, when I was reading through this, one of the things that struck me, and tell me if I'm wrong, but in 2018, who was at the top of the ticket from Texas?
That was not a presidential year. That would have been when Obama was kind of finishing up his term. So
Because
I
I
guess,
think this is what changed us from single party voting was the
yes, that
move,
is when that change happened, was after this. Yes.
right? And so now we don't have single party voting, but people went down and pulled 25 levers. In some cases, they were running unopposed, but it's just an interesting
Yeah.
swap to avoid that from happening. And it happened regardless,
Anyway.
right? I don't know. It's just interesting to me.
Yep. I think it kind of goes to show the voters are going to vote for who they want
Correct.
to vote for
Yeah,
at the end of the day, right? You
that's
can't
right.
really get too clever
That's
with
right.
how you manipulate that.
Yep.
So what does all that mean for the Texas legislature? We're going to have 20 Republicans, 11 Democrats in the Texas Senate, 3 of whom are freshmen. That doesn't sound like many. That's over a tenth of the Texas Senate are going to be freshmen. So that's pretty significant. In the Texas House, it's going to be 88 Republicans and 62 Democrats, and we're going to have 31 freshmen, which is a big number as well. And really, I would say the overall kind of theme is that the body's going to shift a little bit to the right. It's not going to be a huge, earthquake. We were already pretty far to the right, but it's going to shift a little bit. And the big reason for that was really the primaries. We had about 15 Republican incumbents lose. Plus, we had, I don't know, maybe 6 to 8 retire. A lot of that had to do with the debate over public education vouchers or school choice. Governor Abbott yesterday announced that he now believes he has the votes on to advance that issue. So we'll see how that plays out, but that's certainly been a big issue that's taken up a lot of oxygen in the room for the last couple legislative sessions. So in some ways, it will be helpful if that is not the whole focus of next session. Certainly not an issue that we take a position on at the TRA, but it will impact the dynamics and how everyone gets along overall. So what are sort of the open questions at the state level? Well, one scuttlebutt bit of gossip is, do any of their Texas leaders join the Trump White House? You will hear names like Governor Abbott, Attorney General Paxton, Sid Miller, our agriculture committee or commissioner. You'll hear about different legislators. It's too early to know. I don't see a lot of serious chatter about any of those folks.
Me either.
But there's one or two that have a chance, right? So it's something to watch. And then the other big question is, how does a Trump White House impact Texas priorities like border security, like immigration enforcement? Texas actually passed a bill during the last special sessions that essentially said we can use our law enforcement to enforce federal immigration laws. That has been put on hold by the courts, is still working its way through the courts, but you could see how that bill combined with some Trump executive orders on immigration tie us all together in kind of this project and how that plays out with the rest of our politics. And then the other really big question in Texas is, who is going to be our House Speaker? Speaker Phelan has been Speaker for a couple sessions now. He is facing a pretty serious challenge from the right of his party. But I would say most Capitol lobbyist insider folks think Phelan's going to hang on. The House GOP caucus is meeting on December 7th to make their endorsement. And so that will give us a lot of insight into what we can expect. The other big question is, what role do Democrats play? Texas has been very different than our federal government in that traditionally Republicans and Democrats have chaired legislative committees regardless of who's in the majority. But some Republicans want to get rid of that practice. So we'll see how that all shakes out. And then lastly, how does all of this impact restaurants at the state level? Well, we are going to be laser focused on our upcoming legislative session. It's only 140 days and it starts in mid-January. Pre-filing, which means legislators can actually start filing their bills and their priorities ahead of session, that begins on November 11th. So very soon we will start reading through all of the different bills that get filed to see what the restaurant impacts will be. And then the key question, which I alluded to a little bit earlier, is the leadership dynamics. Does Speaker Phelan remain Speaker? How does he get along with Lieutenant Governor Patrick, with Governor Abbott? The relationship between those three really will impact a lot of the legislation and whether it lives and dies at the end of the day. So it's something for us to watch very closely. And then what are we sort of hoping to get out of this session? We have 4 priorities. Basically, we're going to play defense. We're going to try to save restaurants money through things like swipe fee relief and permit fees going away. We want to strengthen our workforce and we want to improve restaurant resiliency. All 4 of these priorities are a direct response to your feedback to us through surveys, through meetings, through town halls. And so we feel really good about those priorities and the fact that, frankly, they're very nonpartisan and we can work with people regardless of their politics to really get these things done. And then the other thing is just the sheer volume of session. There are usually about 8,000 bills that get filed. I look at every single one of them. I don't recommend it. It's why you pay me to do my job so that you don't have to do that. And then we usually end up tracking over 1,000 of them, meaning every step of the process, we see what's in them. We go talk to lawmakers about them because they could have a direct impact on your business. Last but not least, please stay engaged. You've heard us say it before. We've got to have your voice. We've got to have your membership to make sure that we are really well represented in DC, in Austin, in all of our local governments. Please make sure you're getting the newsletter. I can't tell you how many times I get questions and I just send people the newsletter, which I'm happy to do. But the point is, it really is your one-stop shop for all the information you need, federal, state, local, etc. As always, please send us your questions, your feedback, and please continue to invest. If you're on this webinar, you've already donated, so thank you. Please encourage your colleagues, your friends, etc., to do the same. Last call for questions, and then Emily, I'll turn it back over to you to cover anything that I missed. Oh, okay.
So David Denny's asking, are there any early indications about who might be tapped by the Republicans to run for governor in the next cycle?
Well, David, that presumes that Governor Abbott's not going to be running for governor, which I don't think is something we can bank on. It's quite possible Abbott runs again. We don't have term limits in Texas, so there's no limit on the number of times a governor can run. If he goes to DC or decides not to run again, then it will open up a huge fight for who will be next in line. Nope, he has not indicated that.
No, we haven't heard that. Yeah.
Any other questions? Oh, what did I do?
Hi.
Okay. Technology.
I know. Want me to, so I'll just add a couple comments. I mean, I think I wanted to say we're sort of at a historic moment. I believe that because I think we're at a place where we don't have any of the, hopefully COVID baggage, Kels, right? Like we are the largest employer in Texas. We have a lot to accomplish in session. And I think the thing I don't want people to forget about is playing defense is actually even more important sometimes than playing offense. Our Constitution and the way our capital works is not to pass laws, it's to keep a low regulatory environment. And so as many defensive wins as we can get are sometimes as big as the wins themselves when we create new legislation. So that's one. I think two, we've got to continue to work in a bipartisan fashion. And I think that the divide that exists today, while there's excitement on one side, there's disappointment on the other. And I think it's incumbent upon us to bring people together because just as we don't choose who eats in our restaurants, and we love and welcome all who want to work or live or play or you name it, it's the same thing. And I think Kelsey and I have shown an incredible discipline to stay straight down the middle, because we've learned hard lessons on both sides. And so I think, from you all to us, the mandate's still very clear, right? Protect and advance my business, and make sure good things happen. And that's, I think, what we're both incredibly committed to going forward. And so I haven't thought much. A lot of people are reaching out to us. What do you think of this? And what do you think? And it's like, you know what? We have the same agenda that we did. We've just fine tuned it based on the deck that we've been given. And so to me, it's the same level of excitement going into session. And I don't think the partnership with the NRA is been as strong on the advocacy side as I've seen now, right? Just the reaching out on no taxes on tips on cruise, engaging all of the Hill runners, doubling down on this tax. And we have a really chance to do a lot of good on taxes for y'all. And so that gives me a lot of confidence going into session, Kelsey, that we do have such a tight work. I mean, even the night of the election, the NR advocacy team is texting and who's got polling data and what, and, everyone just is in it together. So I think that should give you all a lot of confidence. And I think the tariffs, if you were to say what concerns me a little bit right now is some of the tariffs, because I think about, we had a call yesterday, Kelsey and I, with some of the NRA folks, and you think about equipment and paper and supplies and avocados and things that seem kind of small, but you all are just starting to get that relief back. And then if all of a sudden things that you need desperately are going to cost so much more, you can't get, like, that concerns me. So I think encouraging temperament there and having a plan and realizing that our next leader is a restaurant and hotel owner who much of his business is in restaurants and hotels, and not being afraid to kind of recommunicate. I think that is going to be important, but the tariffs make me just a little nervous.
Yeah, I think that's a very fair summary. We knew heading into this election that regardless of who won in all of these races, we had things that we were going to have to play defense on, new opportunities to play offense. So we've been prepared for this, really, for any outcome for a long time. And so, to Emily's point, I know there's a lot of uncertainty right now, a lot of fear right now, also a lot of people happy right now. But we were prepared for this. We are prepared for this. And our agenda is incredibly nonpartisan. And it's one of the reasons that we love representing this industry, is because it represents service to all. I like to say, when someone comes into your restaurant, you don't ask them, are they a Republican or a Democrat? You ask them what they'd like. And that's really the spirit that we're going to embody here at the TRA, is serving y'all, regardless of your political beliefs, regardless of where you are in the state. Because when restaurants are stronger, our communities are stronger. We've got a couple more questions in the chat. Someone asked about
Overtime.
Yeah, how are we feeling about the overtime salary being overturned? I would say cautiously optimistic. We have a hearing tomorrow in our lawsuit, as I mentioned. This judge has already ruled that the rule is illegal. We just need him to say that again and to say it for us, if that makes sense. That said, judges, they operate on their own timeline. There's no guarantee of when or what they will rule. So that's why I always have to add this sort of cautious optimism. But we're doing everything we can to get that rule struck down before January 1st. I'll also say in our newsletter later today, we have the deep dive on what's in the rule, how do you prepare just in case. So please look at all of that. Have your plan in place just in case, but we're going to do everything we can to get it stopped before January 1.
Yep.
Another question here. Curious if the Affordable Care Act employee count getting increased will come into play now. Yeah, basically folks are asking if there's an opportunity to change the Affordable Care Act. I would say it's certainly on the list. I don't think it's going to be one of the first things that Trump tries to tackle, but it's certainly a conversation that we can have with his administration and with Congress on, is there some relief we can do there, especially, as you said, for those kind of smaller employers who are impacted.
Yeah, definitely. And it came up today here, Kelsey, too, right? Which is, this is something people want to see relief on. And that 50 to 100 was interesting. That's the number that was mentioned. And so I think that is a place, as Kelsey said, where it fits in the priority, but I think you're spot on. That's something that we should make sure is a priority, just in the pecking order of everything else.
Yeah.
Because it is such a burdensome for people, for operators.
Yes. And just not working as intended, right? We hear that all the time. Like, what you're able to offer your employees is completely inaccessible for them anyways. So it's a
Right,
lot
and then they don't do it
for
anyway,
no real
so.
benefit.
Mhm.
Yeah. All right, with that, we're going to sign off a little early. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for being Capital Insiders. And please reach out to us anytime we can help, anytime you have feedback. We can't do what we do without you. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Kels, great job.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, bye, guys.